We are so excited to see everyone here. My name is Shanna Crumley. I'm the Innovation Advisor at the Mayor's Office of the Chief Technology Officer. And with me today are Hassan and Naveed, who's the Deputy Director of the Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes at the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, and also Abdul, who is the Research Manager at MOCJ, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. We're also really curious to see who's here today in the audience. So if you're willing to, we'd love it if you could drop your name and maybe your organization into the chat. We know we have friends from different places, and we're really curious about who's coming today. And also, I think we already made the note that we are recording this session. One last thing to note is that we will be collecting questions for the Q&A throughout the presentation through the chat. So if you have questions throughout the whole time, just go ahead and drop those in the chat, and we'll try to answer them at the end. Great, we can go to the next slide. And let's see here. Awesome. Okay, so this is who we are. And then I guess one last thing on this context of introductions. Our agencies, these two agencies or three agencies, have partnered together to use data specifically in addressing hate crimes. And we're looking at hate crimes in the context of COVID-19 and spikes of hate crimes here in our city, in New York City. So we partnered together to look at this. If you can go to the next slide, I want to give a little bit of framing for this conversation. That is, we work together to understand the hate crimes by layering data and doing data exploration and also data analysis. And we approach these data in two ways. On the left, what we're calling data consolidation. So we were approaching this from a perspective of when you look at hate crimes data, there's one official record of hate crimes that have been reported and then classified as such, and that's an NYPD, a New York Police Department set of data. But there's other data that suggests hate crimes or is related to hate crimes and similar incidents of bias. So we were looking on the left, data consolidation by layering data and data proxies, bringing together open data sources, looking for internal data and public data and other proxy data to see how hate crimes or similar incidents can help us develop indicators to identify potential new data. And then on the right side, we knew that there was a gap from the very beginning. Something that's different, I think, about this project is that we knew that there was a gap in data and that we needed to find the indicators of that gap. So we also were layering for the absence of data, what I call pertinent negatives, which is a medical term, but it's the concept of an absence of a symptom in the presence of other symptoms. So these other symptoms suggest that this third symptom exists, or in this case, these data suggest that there's a gap specific to this absence of data. And so the data we officially have, we know for officially reported hate crimes is only data from whomever felt comfortable reporting it and was in a position to do so and made it all the way through that process of reporting. So we know that there's a lack of data on hate crimes, and we suspect this pertinent negative is related to underreporting or other factors similar to that. So I'm gonna pass this over to Hassan to tell us about the origins of OPHC, its Office to Prevent Hate Crimes, and their work in the city.
Thank you, Shannon. Hello, everyone. For joining us today. I'm extremely excited that my colleagues and I are going to be sharing innovative tools that enhances our city's response to hate crimes and its efforts to prevent hate crimes. Again, my name is Hassan Naveed. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for the New York City's Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes. We are part of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, MOCJ, so we're a unit within it. There's other units as well. As many of you know, government has a tendency to really pick on long names. Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes is a very long name. So today, let's go for acronyms, which we're also addicted to as the city. And so the acronym for my office is OPHC. So if I say OPHC, it means I'm referring to the office that I'm in. Now, again, my name is Hassan Naveed. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for OPHC. Now who is and what is OPHC, right? So this is one of the first government offices of its kind in the country or in the world, right? OPHC launched in September 2019 after an increasing number of hate crimes in our city as well as across the nation. OPHC has a unique role in coordinating cities' efforts to prevent hate crimes and bias incidents. We have an interagency committee where we coordinate with other city agencies on combating bias and hate. And we also engage directly with affected communities and community organizations and leaders through our community advisory team. I really want to highlight this, right? An important aspect of OPHC's focus is that our efforts seek to elevate non-law enforcement deterrence. So what we're talking about here today is something in which we are utilizing these tools to make decisions on how we can combat hate and bias, through means of non-law enforcement deterrence, right? So that's a little bit about OPHC. I want to go over some stats very quickly of hate crimes itself. Oh, well, that was quick. Okay. Now, let's look at overall trends. These are complaint numbers from the NYPD specifically only, right? That means, as Shanna said, the police department classified each complaint as a hate crime. Singular set of data, right? These numbers do not include human rights complaints alleging discrimination to the city's Commission on Human Rights that handles those sorts of complaints, or other city data that implicates potential bias motivation. There's plenty data that indicates it or is a proxy for it. And Abdul will go over that a little bit later on. Now, as you can see, we see a breakdown between 2019 and 2020. There's an obvious decrease in the number of hate crimes. But I do want folks to keep this in mind, right? We were in a pandemic year. On top of that, there are structural factors that also lead and that can contribute to such decreases, right? In previous years, we have seen an increase of hate crimes or just a steady, right, number of hate crimes occurring. This last year, obviously, because of the pandemic, there's been less reporting. Now, an alarming, and at the same time, you'll see that an alarming situation here is the increase in anti-Asian hate crimes from 2019 to 2020. As you can see, this is sort of bolded in red here. That's one anti-Asian hate crime, and this relates to COVID-19, right? No, not this one, I'm sorry. But in 2020, we saw 30 anti-Asian hate crimes that occurred that in many ways primarily were as a result of COVID-19 hate, right? And so OPHC really began engaging with Asian community leaders throughout the city and coordinated with city agencies on how to best respond to this alarming increase. We hosted virtual Asian community town halls in several languages and conducted what they call upstander trainings. How do you stand up for your neighbors if you see something that's happening, right? And we produced educational materials for teachers and the public, among many other things as well. Now, as you see, you'll see here as well that from 1 to 30, I want you all to look down at anti-Hispanic. 8 hate crimes in 2019 and 2020, we only had 1 hate crime. Is this possible? Living in New York City, a city of 8.5, 9 million, 10 million people, is it really possible that these numbers itself represent the number of hate crimes that have occurred in this city? I mean, who thinks so? Actually, not exactly. And we'll talk about that in a few seconds and why this project is very important. So I want to quickly just show you our hate crime complaints overall trends between 2020 and 2019. Just a quick overview. You see that there's been a decrease overall. And now let me go into the start. So as you can see here, this was very much, which in the shaded area over here is the anti-Asian incidents, and what includes in the unshaded areas are the other hate crimes, right? So as you can see, this again shows an increase in anti-Asian hate crimes and a steady one throughout the time, and we're still actually looking at these incidents occurring. This is, again, only NYPD data. And this was also around the same time as we were looking at this spike of increase between February and March of 2020 is when OPHC and MOCJ began, and that's the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, engaging with Shanna and her team at the Mayor's Office of the Chief Technology Officer, or MOCTO, on a pretty prevalent issue in hate crime complaints. And that's underreporting, as well as other factors that end up leading to such low things, because this is just a snapshot, right? And I want to explain to you what underreporting is. What are some of the reasons why someone may not want to report, right? And so these are factors that are very likely in vulnerable populations, underrepresented communities that are affected by many of these issues. This includes believing that the incident was not significant enough to report to the police. Concerns about reprisal, immigration enforcement, or other bad consequences. Trying to take a report, but it's not being taken seriously, right? Privacy concerns. We've worked on hate crimes in the past where hate crime has occurred and it's an anti-LGBTQ hate crime, but the individual may not feel comfortable reporting it because it might out themselves, right? Community relations with police. As you know, we're undergoing a very big sort of civil rights issue in our history at the moment that works towards police reform. And there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen for us to get folks to feel comfortable in engaging with local police departments. Language access. Remember, many of these communities, Asian communities, as well as other immigrant communities, in many cases, language access is a key to be able to get access to services to the city. And then also COVID-19 and pandemic barriers that really ended up preventing many folks from making those complaints as well, too, right? These are systemic issues that end up impacting vulnerable communities across the board. And the more vulnerable a community is, the more likely and the more likely there is going to be underreporting in those instances. Now, this is a gap of data, right? You look back at this and you say, wow, well, if this is a snapshot, this is only folks who feel comfortable talking to NYPD, right, or reporting a hate crime, or the crime has already occurred and got media attention. There's likely much more that's out there, right? And so I think we have to keep that in mind. And what we're trying to address here is how can we get a comprehensive picture of what's going on and not just rely on one set of data. We know that there's other sets of data in the city that indicate bias as well. And I will let my colleagues explain exactly that stuff. So we brought this to the attention of Shanna and her lovely team. And this is when we began discussing, well, how can we begin addressing it? And I'll turn it back over to Shanna.
Thanks, Hassan. Yeah, so we determined together that this was, we were looking for ways to bring these data sets together in a holistic way and also to analyze and address the gaps. Go next slide. So we felt at our office that this was a natural affinity with this group we have called the NYCX Innovation Fellows. The NYCX Innovation Fellows program is a collaboration between our office and the City of New York and the US Digital Response. The USDR was founded by US government former chief technology officers of the US in response directly to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it started at about a year ago in March 2020. And their goal was to connect governments and nonprofits with volunteer technologists to quickly deliver people-centered services, ramp up things very quickly, build things so that there was a lot more support to governments during this time. Through this partnership with Innovation Fellows, MOCTO and OPHC paired with a dream team of NYCX Innovation Fellows for an 8-week discovery sprint and a 4-week sprint to operationalize what we built. So 12 weeks in total, we worked together on this project and built what you'll see in a few moments. Just to give you a sense of our methodology with that program, we go through a discovery phase where we narrow down the scope to a specific actionable challenge, determine what the best solutions might be for this very specific case, and then make an action plan for building or sourcing or analyzing whatever we're trying to build together to come out with a better product or service or recommendation or finding. And then we do the build. Together we bring in a team to build and test a product or service that we've determined is the best solution for this challenge. So let me introduce you very briefly. I have to give a shout out to this team because they are phenomenal and fast and professional and committed to public service. These people are amazing. On the left, you have our technical advisor, Chang. He is a full and a half-time entrepreneur. His company, Spruce Systems Incorporated, is currently in the Y Combinator. So he's working on that and also advising us and giving so much of his time and energy to us. He's also an engineer and has founded several New York-based software startups and works on decentralized identity and loves to volunteer for civic causes like this on the side. Our fellows team through at USDR, our product manager to the left side or the right side is Ray Tran. She had a background in management consulting, technology strategy, and product management. And she was very passionate about making data equitable and ethical and helping decision-making in government. I'll go backwards. So Jared here in the middle is a data scientist who's has always been interested in the intersection of technology and public service delivery. He's actually a public servant himself at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So he's based in Cambridge and has been helping out here and has brought two perspectives. And then last, but certainly not least, in the middle here, we have Divya Ravindran. She is a data scientist and machine learning engineer, and she's built products like the world's first interest rate deviation engine for banking products and product ranking and recommendation algorithms for e-commerce. So she brings an extensive machine learning and data analysis background and has helped us build some of the tools that Abdul's going to run through in a second. So next slide, we came together with this dream team we brought together. We figured out that we needed to drill down specifically on what our key goals were, what our needs were, and then what our goals were. So on the need side, we knew that we didn't have an instrument or a system to get this holistic view of hate in New York City, or citywide, on a map, honestly, sense of where hate crimes were happening and why and what those need areas were. And then, like, we didn't have much data about potential underreporting, and also potential vulnerable communities that have perhaps different relationships with hate crimes than others. And especially, as again, in all of this, we're looking at in the context of the spikes during COVID-19 and hate crimes. So the approach that we came up with is that we determined we wanted to get an integrated integrated dashboard of data on a citywide perspective. We wanted to explore quantitative relationships and identify gaps between the different data sets. We wanted to map incidents on that city level to see if there were areas that needed more community support or funding. And then last but not least, we really wanted to understand those factors that led to underreporting. So we know that some communities, again, are less likely to report hate crimes. So we were going to look for that pertinent negative and try to address where is underreporting happening, what proxies are there perhaps for that, and how can we address that specifically. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Abdul to take us through some of the results.
Great, thanks, Shanna. My name is Abdul Rad. That's my name. That's my first name right there. My name is Abdul Rad. I'm a research manager at the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. So I support a number of different research portfolios in the office. Luckily, one of them is the Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes. And honestly, I can't give out, I just have to keep shouting out Divya, Ray, and Jared, and Wayne. They are the brilliant people behind all of this. I just emailed and bothered them and created more work for them. So huge shout out to them and their brilliant work. So I think before I even talk about, I'll give a quick overview of the tool before I go into some of the outputs, and then I'll go into the process. For I know there are definitely some data people on the line I see who are going to have some questions. So currently the city does not have a centralized database or dashboard that tracks complaints of bias incidents, hate crimes, or other data that are indicative of potential bias. So, and as Hassan noted, the gap of the information became even clearer and more salient as New York City started to experience the first wave of COVID-19 anti-Asian hate crimes. And we were trying to figure out what communities and neighborhoods to implement non-law enforcement and proactive strategies focused on prevention and responsive, and that is responsive to recurring incidents. And as was noted earlier, the NYPD data we receive, albeit important and critical in terms of especially violent incidents, it only really represents communities that feel comfortable reporting to NYPD. And so there was this huge gap, as noted earlier, and we were trying to get around that. So the PhD, it's a great acronym, isn't it? Is a data consolidation and decision-making tool developed to better understand the landscape and community impact of hate crimes in New York City, examine various factors contributing to underreporting, and identifying gaps in public hate crime and administrative data. So primarily, it does a few things. One, we're trying to understand the landscape of hate crimes in New York City through a community conditions framework. We're not trying to look at it through a criminology or the sort of orthodox lens. We're trying to move away from those types of approaches. We're trying to enhance OPHC's data-driven response and prevention efforts that are focused on non-law enforcement approaches, developing a strategy / method to identify areas where there might be potential underreporting of hate crimes and better inform funding strategies, and the integration of different data sets to help explore quantitative relationships and identify gaps around hate and bias. And so quickly with the process, I see that Divya and Jared are on the line too, so that's very exciting. They know all about this. So we started with focusing on New York City open data. We want this at the end of the day, hopefully when the project is done, it's still ongoing, and I want to emphasize that, is that this is a tool that hopefully the data can be used by the public and organizations and activists and advocates. So we thought it would be best to ultimately start with New York City open data, so it could be a tool for everyone. It doesn't have any personal identifiable information, no PII whatsoever. So we started with, you could see on the bottom right, large set of data sets, everything from NYPD to parks to census, a lot of census, bullying, harassment, education, et cetera. And then the process which our brilliant dev team started, we started at the NTA, which is, if you're familiar with New York City data, it's a neighborhood tabulation area. And then we drill down to aggregate to census tracts, census blocks, and eventually to the NYPD precinct level, which is where hate crimes are collected. So that's basically the smallest aggregate we have to look at hate crimes. And hopefully we can go beyond the scope of that and break that frame in the coming years. But that's sort of thing. So started with collection and consolidation, and then a lot of merging and cleaning to let us get to the next step. So now actually going into the project a little bit. So next button, Hassan. This is my virtual button. Great. Appreciate that. So to compensate for large scale underreporting, and hate crimes are notorious for large scale underreporting, similar to domestic violence and other crimes. So, to compensate for this underreporting by communities that, due to various reasons, are hesitant to report, we produce this hate crime index, which includes NYPD hate crime complaints, but also integrates an underreporting proxy variables and other socioeconomic indicators capturing community conditions. So, basically the index proposed a shift from single attribute decision-making, which is what was just the NYPD complaints, to a multi-attribute decision-making tool. So what does this look like? Before we would make decisions looking at, oh, well, this precinct has, the highest number of complaints, and maybe that's where we need to put money for, non-law enforcement approaches to reduce hate crimes. Now there's, and going back to Divya and Jared's expertise around ranking, we developed this sort of ranking system and this index that now tells us, well, sure, that this has a high number of hate crime complaints, but this other one has low, and it has high levels of other proxy variables that can potentially identify or indicate high levels of underreporting. And I wasn't going to plan on making this interactive, but I'm actually interested because I see some brilliant people in the audience of what type of proxy underreporting variables you could think of that could be of interest that we should consider since this is ongoing development. So if you could think of different things, and I'm going to name a few that we've included, things like census response rates to potentially look at areas that might have higher undocumented rates. We included stop, question, and frisk, as well as police misconduct, because we think that's an important variable to capture the relationship between police and community. We think that this is crucial, and it could build more capital around providing alternatives for reporting. So yeah, just go crazy in the chat. Any other types of proxies you could think for underreporting that we should be considering to integrate. So there's a hate crimes index, which has now informs, once it's completed in terms of, refining it and fine tuning it, we'll be informing OPHC on, which areas we should look at and other types of different factors like that. Then we have mapping, which you could see on the bottom right. Yours truly, Jared, did some great work on Cardo, and we're working on sort of fine tuning that. And then we're hoping to do lots around generating reports and dashboards. And we are a little bit away from that, but we're hoping that we can provide this to our interagency partners as well as the public and advocates. The goal of this being that we want to be able to be more responsive than we were, initially when the anti-Asian related incidents started to pop up. We didn't have a system to understand where things were happening, and we're hoping that when we are in a time of crisis again, that we could be hopefully more proactive than reactive. And then finally, a really important note is around monitoring and detecting for algorithmic bias. The hate crimes index is a simple algorithmic decision-making tool. And like any sort of algorithm or any type, it's always prone to some type of algorithmic bias. So we're working with MOCTO very closely to make sure we can monitor and detect that and develop strategies to identify when that's happening when we're using it. So I guess moving on to, the last slide, or you guys are not supposed to know that, but second to last slide. Great. Oh, no, not, there we go. Again, the PHE allows New York City to understand priority areas in a way that better serves underrepresented communities. And so just a few things, with this really nice visual, it's very nice to look at. Great job, Shanna. Is one of the key things that we want to do with this project is the accessibility of open data. We only use open data, everything is replicable, and everything could be validated through New York City open data. And we also think, again, we're hoping that by the time this tool is developed, hopefully in the coming year, we'll be able to make parts of it public. We don't want it's a government tool, it should belong to the public. So we want to make sure that we're able to find ways to make parts of it public, and we're going to be working on that throughout the next year or two. Also, community-driven solutions with non-law enforcement deterrence. The information and the data in this tool are to inform specifically non-law enforcement approaches. And we really want to emphasize that. So this is a key part, and that's why we've included all those community condition variables. And again, we are in the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, and one thing that we've been pushing for and advocating for is to make sure that we go beyond criminal justice data. This is a typical mistake we've made in the past, and we want to make sure that we're taking a more human approach to these problems. And so that's a key part. And again, just want to re-emphasize the part around the data being biased and making sure that we're monitoring for that. We're taking that very seriously. We need to emphasize that and continue to emphasize that, because as we're trying something new, it's also prone to potential unintended consequences that we need to ensure we're not causing like in the past or with past sort of tools that are developed by government. So and also just before I pass it back to Shanna, again, a big thank you to Jared, Divya, and Ray, and Wayne, and of course, Shanna and the Mayor's Office of the Chief Technology Officer on pioneering this forward. And we are really excited to start finishing the development of this tool in the coming year.
Thank you, Abdul. And thank you both as well. I think this has been a really rewarding partnership for everyone involved, and a really fascinating topic to tackle in this way. So to bring it back to our circles, I think that, like we mentioned at the beginning, one of the most interesting things about this project has been that in fact, we focused on the data that we do have that is directly related to hate crimes. We've also focused on data that's tangential or proxy data to try to paint that picture a little bit more holistically. And then finally, we focused on the absence of data, that pertinent negative. So what the data is inferring about something that's missing or this gray area. I think it's been a process of painting the picture with layers of data, of proxies and open data, private data, understandings of different sides of this, until we understood where some of those gaps were. And then most importantly, now we're trying to address why those gaps are there and to figure out what the outcome is. What is this data telling us that we can do next and do differently and where we can focus, which is ultimately the whole point of this. I would love to encourage everyone that's listening. I know that folks on the line are from a variety of backgrounds and a variety of skill sets and policy areas, but to encourage you to also think about looking at where the gaps are that you can be looking for in your work. If you're using open data, what kinds of layering or proxies or pertinent negatives can you look for through your own work? What kind of pictures of data can you paint? So with that, I think we will move towards the questions section of the discussion. So please drop some questions in the chat, because otherwise we're going to start just chatting. I don't see any questions yet, but please do bring some in. But I'll pose a question while we're here. I'm wondering, Hassan and also Abdul, you spoke about this being like the first time we have an office like this and the first time we have a data set like this and an analysis like a hate crimes index. Could you talk a little bit about how New York City differs from other cities in this response?
Specifically to COVID-19 or to the anti-Asian incidents or to how we end up looking at data and such?
I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about why we made it to the point of having an office and also having an index where some other cities have a different approach.
Yeah, and so thank you for that question, Shannon. And I think that we're in a very unique time, right? And I think in the last several years, and even in the last decades or so, we've seen a rising increase in hate crimes, right? And the big effort on part of many folks in the policy world who work in the criminal justice realm, who work in the civil rights or the restorative justice sort of communities, really wanted to look towards getting a better understanding of how we can best prevent hate crimes. What are some of the efforts that we can do to do so? But at the same time, knowing that the information that we have available does not paint an entire picture. Traditionally speaking, I think Abdul said it best, there tends to be a single attribution decision-making process, right? This is allowing for us to really end up taking decision-making understanding and moving it towards again, sort of community conditions, structural conditions that would end up resulting in certain outcomes where people are less likely to report and such. And so this office was created because of the increase in hate crimes that have occurred in New York City over the last few years. And the urgency for us to address it as a city that is extremely diverse, right? And also looking at ways and really anteing up how the government ends up looking to, one, identify issues, right? Learn about these issues in a holistic way, and then address them in ways that end up meeting this non-law enforcement intervention, right? So if we notice, what I think is amazing about this particular, these tools is the mapping part is very interesting because the team that again, great team, mapped out every subway station, mapped out various different things that provides us with a better geographic idea of what's happening and where it's happening, right? And what's near it, right? So if we can identify certain religious institutions nearby, community organizations, community centers, subway stations, we can also, as the city, as an OPHC, begin to identify potential stakeholders to work with, right, to figure out a way to respond to something there, or if we're noticing that the index itself shows that there is less likely for an individual to report, we can also reach out to those various partners in those areas to figure out how we can work towards meeting the community's needs where they're at, right? Where they want to report, how they want to report, our stuff in English. Do we need to look towards trying to work with local law enforcement and potentially providing more resources or services in relation to translation services, right? Stuff like that. So I think that this is what's really unique about this, right? I have yet, and I've been working in the criminal justice sort of reform field for about 10 years. I have yet to see sort of a tool that's really working towards this sort of assessment, right? And so I believe that there are some other cities that are actually looking towards developing an office like ours. This is only one project among the many others that we're working on that are really addressing the big question: how do you stop hate crimes at a structural level, right? With the resources, with the city agencies and the apparatus that we already have.
Definitely. We're getting a couple questions in the chat, so I think we'll go. I think we have some time. So the question coming in from Elise is: was there anything that you found surprising in the making of the data board or through our data analysis?
Lots. So again, we're still working on developing this dashboard fully. I think, and the dev team can also tell you about all the different types of challenges. I think because, I guess maybe I'll talk about some challenges, which are kind of, I don't know if there were surprises, but I think it's sort of related. But I think that, the main surprising thing, the goal, the initial sort of idea of this was like, let's just see what type of data is out there before we really think about what we need next. Like, let's map it out. And there really is just like such little data, right, around hate and bias that's publicly available. There's other ways to look at it, like include, for example, we looked at school survey data that's public, and bully bias scores. We looked across like maybe things that are happening in parks and things like graffiti and other types of things. But I think that was the most surprising part, is how limited it is. And then I think the other thing, which I guess we were very familiar with, but I think some of the team was surprised at, just like how low some of the numbers are, which is what we want. Don't get us wrong. Like, we want hate crimes to be low, but as underreporting becomes less of an issue, we will probably expect, right, to be a increase in hate crimes. So it's a sort of it's a strange problem, right, where it's like, hate crimes could be going up because we're doing a better job or the relationship's better. But that's something that is definitely surprising. But I think just another part of like what we found surprising, and I'll let like Shanna and Hassan also jump in, but I think it was just like the reliability of some of the data was some of it was really great and some of it was really questionable. And I think, understanding that, and I think New York City Open Data does a pretty good job sort of explaining some of the limitations with what data set you're using. But I think, some of the census data we brought in with the NTA data, and then we're aggregating up, and some of the difficulties there, I think some of it was, I think, surprising, but more concerning, because it really shows you how little we know about the areas, I think. But yeah.
I guess I could add one thing that was interesting to that point. This was my first time working directly with hate crimes data in this context, and so I was learning a lot about criminal justice as we went to this project. And I think something that's interesting is how much depends on a single data point, often in terms of response, and how important that data is, that the data is good, that the data is accurate, is not biased. Because if we only have a few numbers of, in this case, the number of hate crimes or some of the demographics, then we make big decisions based on a very small amount of data or a very small number. And so it was an interesting process to try to figure out how to add to that picture and why that was so important.
And I'll echo that too. I mean, again, we have not in the past, right, from my knowledge, integrated data from various different parts of this city that indicate bias, right, and really put it together to get a idea, right? I mean, I think with decision making as policymakers, we want to be as comprehensive, as holistic as possible, right? And I think that allows for us to be able to achieve the best results in trying to address the issue of hate crimes, but also meeting communities where they're at, right? I mean, these communities that are out, that are throughout the entire city, there are many trending issues that may prevent certain communities from wanting to, engage with the police or the government, right? And so to be able for us to get an understanding at a very comprehensive level provides for more efficiency and more effectiveness.
I see a few questions around whether this information is public and some of those considerations. So maybe we can answer. One person's asking if this dashboard is public, and then another person was asking how we were thinking about concerns around whether data is public or not, and if so, how the access could be misused, and responsibilities of the data thereof. Abdul, do you want to tackle that?
Sure. Yeah. So the data, I mean, all the data we're using is public. It's all available on New York City Open Data or the U.S. Census Bureau. In terms of, I see the preliminary dashboard question. That is not even something that, that's something we're working on just right now. And I think one of the things that's important with these projects is beyond we don't have the dashboard yet, right, complete, but before we can really put anything out, the important thing is also to validate and to make sure that we're not going to have questions or concerns around what we are putting out, even though it is all public data. So it's interrogating it and spending it and having a research period to see, what are some of the things coming out? What are some of the concerns? Maybe there's some issues with the data that we should probably flag for different agencies that we're working with. So I think, so in terms of were there any concerns with making this hate crime data public? The hate crime data is all public, right? So, you could go on NYPD. NYPD has a page. They actually recently switched their data reporting, which is great. Obviously, we have to switch some things around now too, but it is more granular, so it allows for a little bit more understanding of what's going on. It's updated every quarter, so I encourage everyone to check that out. Is it easy to access to be misused? Yeah, I mean, I think any sort of data could be misused, and I think that's there is responsibility on our part to make sure that as we are cleaning and coding the data and presenting it, that we are, validating and doing the right things. So that's why it's going to take a while to see if anything can become public anytime soon. So right now, nothing public, but we are hoping in theory, anyone could in theory take the data that we all used and develop the same thing. And we want to make sure that's an open process, and so we will be, putting out a document, how we did it, yeah, does that answer most of the public questions? Right.
I suppose another question piggybacks on that from a different angle. Till was asking whether we use insights from social media to confirm trends. And the quick answer to that is that was, we thought of that as a natural data set that would be useful, but it was way out of scope for the project we were doing. We had 12 quick weeks. We had, certain access and certain priorities and things. So we had to keep that out of the initial scope. But that concept was ideal. Do you guys want to touch on that a little bit further?
Yeah. So, I mean, this was something that we were interested in, right? Especially with how social media interacts with hate and bias, how hate spreads, especially in the 21st century. And again, so as Shanna noted, it was beyond the scope in terms of just like the sheer amount of data. And then also there were concerns with if it's Twitter data, we need to buy, and there's all this other things. And then would that be publicly accessible? What type of information can we do? So it would lose out a little bit on the personal, trying to keep everything de-identified to an extent. But also I think it would just be on the scope. I do think that it's an important thing to look into and understand. And I know that there has been a lot of, research and empirical work done around it. And that's actually some of the more solid stuff around hate crimes. One of the things, if anyone, any researchers on the line who look at hate crimes, is it's a very explored, misunderstood field. It's just it's tough to identify predictors and other things. And it really does vary by group and area and geography. So, but yeah, social media is definitely something that we flagged, and, we are going to keep in mind. But yeah. I also see multiple questions against the anti-Asian, so I'll just quickly address that. So I'm actually going to put a link to our annual report that we just published, and that has actually the data for 2020, and there was a significant increase in anti-Asian related hate crimes from 1 in 2019 to 30, and I believe majority of them were violent. So, and of course, this is only what's reported to NYPD. There's a lot of things we see on social media and other things that obviously we can't include, and of course we have to respect the person. So I think, but that's what was reported to the NYPD. So there was a significant increase, and we're trying to do our best this year to sort of, through educational campaigns and other things Hassan can mention, restorative justice work, I think is definitely worth noting that are helpful.
Yeah, and so I see a question that pertains to what are the actions as the city has taken on addressing these hate crimes. As soon as we saw stuff happening last year, we brought together an interagency committee, right, which really ended up putting together a plan in conjunction and with discussion on with Asian community leaders. We literally spoke to Asian community leaders on a weekly basis to figure out what was the best way for us to be able to address this issue, because it's so important, right? And what are some of the non-law enforcement interventions that we can look towards? From whether it was educational campaigns in the schools, we did Asian community town halls in multiple languages, explaining and providing resources to folks in Asian communities on how to report hate crimes, how to report bias incidents. And so it was something that, is continuing because the issue is not gone. And we are functioning within the context of knowing that what's out there or what's being reported is just a snapshot of what is a significant problem in our city itself. And so for us to be able to justify that or provide evidence for that, that is, aside from just hate crime numbers, we're looking at something like this tool where it shows us, right, various different areas that are indicative of bias, right, that can also show, well, there have been anti-Asian sort of situations within these various different contexts. Where is it happening? Why is it happening, right? All these sorts of questions are things that help us really get a better idea of how we can share this stuff with communities to determine what solutions would look like overall. Now, I do see that someone had mentioned that they reported a hate crime incident in 2020 and did not hear back. Selena, I'm very sorry to hear that. I'm going to provide my personal information right now to you. Let's talk offline. Okay. And just so you all know, we as an office don't handle, we're not a reporting entity when it comes to hate crimes. We're not a part of the NYPD. We are part of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. And so our role, it very much is to look at strategies towards community solution strategies towards prevention. And then also when an incident does happen, we look at response strategies as well overall. So I will provide my personal information. Actually, I'll just put it in the chat for everybody in case if folks have any questions regarding that.
Hassan, could I ask a follow-up question on Selena's point? Is there, just for everyone's knowledge, like what is the general process if you were to experience a hate crime today? What would you do to do a reporting? What does that reporting process look like? And also, do you have any recommendations for that process or for other ways to report it that would be useful data in this picture that we're painting? Because we know that we see these types of incidents reported in a lot of ways across different data sets and community organizations. What's the pipeline like, and what would you recommend?
Well, so the pipeline in terms of the reporting process, I mean, obviously call 911. If you believe that you are a victim of a hate crime or you witness a hate crime, it's important to call 911. There's also, I'm going to put in resources as well that end up providing additional information on what the pipeline is, what resources and services are available. We understand that some communities may not necessarily feel comfortable engaging with law enforcement or other places. So the resources and services that I'll link into the chat will provide other avenues for assistance as well. There are tremendously amazing AAPI community organizations in the city itself that provide services you can report incidents to as well. Now, a hate crime in itself, it's a very narrow, sort of a thing within a larger sort of context of bias and hate. There are bias incidents that occur. I'm talking specifically about discrimination, right? So if you were discriminated against over the color of your skin by, an employer, for example, right? These incidents and these situations are things that would end up being reported to the city's Commission on Human Rights. Yes, we have seen an increase of bias incidents to the city's Commission on Human Rights as it relates to to Asian communities here in New York, right? And so for those, we obviously advise and recommend folks to please call 311 and tell them to connect you to the Human Rights Commission, right? And the Human Rights Commission will then go through a complaint intake process with you as well. Any other sorts of questions, I encourage you all to email me, and I'm more than happy to provide additional resources on this matter too. I'll put the links in right now.
I think we do have one more last question we can wrap up with, which is more technical. So back to the dashboard and to the hate index. I think now I have to find the question. Hang on.
I think I see it. It's about the predictive validity.
Yes.
Hey, Michael. I think we've met before. So I think, yeah, so one of the things we're trying to do right now is refine the index, right? So we have it in a place where we could start doing some validity checks around other types of data beyond hate crimes, right? So this might be introducing, just like Hassan just mentioned, CCHR data. And, you know, since we don't have those data streams yet or able to connect with them, it's hard to say what the relationship is between, you know, bias incidents and hate crimes in New York City. But this is something we're definitely interested in. But feel free to follow up. Do you have any suggestions over what things we should be validating against? Other types of data, because I would love to hear your expertise as well. And of course, for everyone else who's in the audience, feel free to, you know, drop in suggestions, things we should consider, be careful about, you know, new message. It's just Hassan. Yeah.
Great. I suppose one last question for all three of us, if there's no more questions in the audience. Just in general, what can people do beyond this new knowledge of how to report a hate crime yourself or to help someone report something? What can a general audience do to support preventing and addressing hate crimes in New York City?
I'll let Hassan start, and then I'll fill in the gaps.
You know, listen, it is so important as New Yorkers and as people who love and respect our neighbors and our communities overall to really be upstanders, right, when it comes to these incidents. I'm going to share something called the 5 Ds with people here, and it's provided by an organization called Hollaback. And what the 5 Ds are basically are ways that one can intervene when a situation begins to escalate, right? And there's 5 different ways of doing that. Obviously, I think it's important, very important, to assess the situation around you to be able to determine what intervention you want to take, you want to end up utilizing in that space. The first D is distract. And that's really taking an indirect approach to de-escalating the issue. And if that might involve, you know, sort of standing in the way between the individual who's being harassed or whatever it might be versus the individual who's doing it, right? The second D is to delegate, right? Maybe get help from someone else, right? If they're seeing that you're willing to take on and intervene in this situation and you need assistance, I promise you there are other people also in that train car or wherever that is that also would want to help too, as long as there's a level of, you know, assistance too. And if that means you delegate and then collectively choose to create a distraction, then that's an important aspect too. The third thing is to document. It's really helpful, you know, to have video of the incident, you know, to be able to obviously be there to provide support afterwards when it comes to law enforcement responding or someone else responding. At the same time, you know, keep a safe distance and remember to say the date and time on part of recording as well too. And then we have the fourth one is delay, right? You know, after the incident has occurred, it's so important to be able to check in with the individual. If you have engaged in the other sort of Ds as well, people are human. They need help. There's assistance. It is frightening. It is scary to be in a situation like that. And the humanity of us really matters. And to be able to really end up engaging and checking with the person, being there for them, figuring out what they and how they want to end up address the issue. is a very particular way. And lastly, but not least, and this is one that is, fairly, a strong one, but can be kind of scary, but it's to be direct to the individual, right? When we see that someone is harassing someone in trying to intervene, maybe it does involve saying to them, that's inappropriate, leave them alone. At the same time, I think it's important to assess, your safety, but speak out about the harassment and be firm and clear, right? So these 5 Ds are something that I've just put a link inside. They're utilized through means of us really trying to maintain community, healthy communities, building a sense of connection between communities and people. Sometimes in New York City, we're on the train and we're going and it's tunnel vision, but we don't want these incidents to occur. And we need to show solidarity in these situations. And those are the 5 Ds, they're linked in there to be able to provide support to any communities that, might be in a situation where they're, being harassed or whatever it might be.
Thank you for putting that into perspective, and just our average day as we go out today. I know less people are riding the train maybe than usual, but in our interactions. Thank you both for helping present this work. Thank you to everyone who came. If you have any other questions, I know Hassan put his number or his email address in this chat. I'll drop mine there as well, because that was supposed to be on that last slide, I think. Abdul
my number in there too.
What's up? What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to hearing from you. Please send us any feedback you have, and we look forward to seeing you at the rest of Open Data Week. Have a good afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Have a good week.